After my father's funeral, I came back to the house expecting silence. Instead, I found my room emptied, the locks changed, and a strange clicking noise behind the wall in his study. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My brother handed me a will I wasn't supposed to see. I didn't speak. I listened. I waited. And that night, I found a hidden USB with my father's voice whispering, "Don't trust them. Watch everything." That was the moment I stopped grieving and started investigating. This isn't a story about loss. It's about what my family tried to erase and what I refused to forget. The front steps creaked the same way they had when I was 8, racing home from school with scraped knees and stories I thought my father wanted to hear. But the sound didn't feel warm anymore. It sounded uncertain. The kind of uncertainty that wraps itself around your spine and whispers, "You don't belong here." I hadn't been home in over 2 years, and now that Dad was gone, I thought this house would feel emptier. Instead, it felt like something had been removed and not replaced, like a vital organ, and the walls knew it. My suitcase dragged softly across the foyer rug, but no one helped me. My mother stood in the dining room doorway, arms crossed, her eyes dry. "You're staying here?" she asked. No embrace. No, "I missed you." Just that. My brother Peter hovered behind her, not meeting my gaze. He'd hugged me at the funeral, stiffly, then disappeared for the rest of the day. Now he reached into his coat and tossed me a set of keys. "Dad said the house is yours," he muttered, then added with a half-smile that never touched his eyes, "Guess that makes you the landlord." I turned them over in my palm. They felt too light. Later that evening, I walked the house alone. I opened the door to what used to be my bedroom and stopped cold. The bookshelves were gone. The posters I'd taped to the closet door as a teenager vanished. Even the dusty box I'd hidden under the bed, full of notes from Dad and birthday cards. I had thought I'd find them here, but it was as if I'd never existed. The room was now painted beige and staged like a guest room. I stood in the doorway for 10 minutes, then whispered aloud, "Did I even live here?" My hand brushed against the wall as I stepped inside, grounding myself. And that's when I realized they had erased me, every trace. Dinner was a silent performance. My mother barely touched her food. Peter scrolled through his phone. I tried to bring up Dad, his favorite records, the way he made coffee at 6:45 a.m. sharp, but they nodded like I was talking about a stranger. When I mentioned the study, my mother cut in. "That room's locked," she said quickly. "Best leave it that way." That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls were too quiet, and the silence had a sound of its own. At exactly 2:12 a.m., I heard a low clicking from above, the study. It wasn't loud, but rhythmic, mechanical, like a recorder reaching the end of a tape. I slipped out of bed, crept up the stairs, and pressed my ear to the door. Click, click, pause. The key Peter gave me didn't fit. The next day, I wandered the house again. I tapped along the wooden floorboards in the upstairs hallway, half remembering how Dad used to say, "The house has secrets, you just need to listen." And there it was, a soft, hollow knock under the floor vent beside the old linen closet. My fingers trembled as I loosened the nails. A single plank shifted under my hand. Beneath it, wrapped in wax paper and duct tape, was a small black USB drive. I stared at it. It stared back. My laptop protested when I plugged it in, some kind of encrypted file, old software. But after 20 minutes, it opened. One video, no title, no timestamp. I clicked play. The screen was black. But then my father's voice. If you're listening, that means I didn't make it in time. Catherine, don't trust what they tell you. Don't ask questions. Just watch, observe. And when you're ready, act. 3 minutes of whispers, warnings, regret. His voice cracked once when he said my name, like he hadn't said it out loud in a while. And then the screen faded to silence. I didn't move, didn't breathe. My heart pounded, not from grief, but from the cold realization that whatever had happened in this house wasn't over. And from that moment, I stopped being the daughter they forgot. I became the one who remembered everything. I waited until the house emptied. My mother had gone to her garden club. Peter had left for what he claimed was a legal meeting. Ironic, considering. Alone in the living room, I retrieved the thick envelope she had handed me at the funeral, labeled Dad's Last Will and Testament. It wasn't sealed. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, as though some part of me still hoped to see my name. I scanned line after line, eyes dry but burning. There it was, the property, all assets, the inheritance, everything left to Peter Monroe. There was no mention of me, not even a courtesy line. It was like I had never existed in my father's life, not in any meaningful way. But it didn't make sense. Dad had always believed in fairness. He may have been silent, withdrawn at times, but never cruel. And yet, this document wasn't just indifferent, it was surgical, cold, deliberate. I flipped through the pages again. No notary stamp, no official seal, no witness signatures, just printed names and a single signature at the bottom that looked rushed, uneven. It wasn't his handwriting, or at least it wasn't how I remembered it. I rushed back upstairs, heart racing. I opened the video on the USB again. This time I noticed something else. A second file, hidden in a subfolder labeled Draft. Inside, a scanned document, handwritten, dated 2 months before his death. A different will. I sat back, stunned. It listed me, Catherine Monroe. It split the estate equally between me and Peter. There were scribbles in the margins, notes about the house, a request to turn his office into a reading room, a line about my daughter's strength. My eyes blurred as I read that part again and again. Then I clicked the second video, this one much shorter. "I'm trying to file it," my father whispered. "But they won't let me leave the house. Peter's watching my calls. Your mother, she's angry. I'm hiding this here, in case I don't make it." He looked straight into the camera for 3 seconds before the screen went black. I didn't realize I was crying until a tear hit the laptop trackpad. I closed the lid slowly, then walked into his old room. It smelled faintly of cedar and Old Spice. His shirt still hung in the closet. I pulled one down, the brown flannel he always wore when barbecuing in the fall, and held it to my chest. The fabric still remembered his shape. I sat on the floor beside his bed, curled around the shirt, and let myself cry. Not because of the money, not because of Peter, because I had spent years convincing myself that if I stayed quiet, stayed loyal, my place in this family would be safe. That love, in the end, would be enough. But love, it seemed, was no match for paper, or signatures, or lies. When I woke from the nap, I didn't mean to take. The sun was dipping. Shadows stretched across the walls like claws. I opened the contacts list on Dad's old flip phone. One name stood out, Ms. Rachel Lorne, Care Aide. Her number was still active. The voice that answered was cautious. "Who is this?" "I'm Catherine Monroe," I said softly. "My father was Gerald." A pause, then a sigh. "I wondered if you'd call." We met the next morning in a quiet cafe 2 towns over. Rachel was in her 50s, with tired eyes and hands that shook slightly when she stirred her tea. "I shouldn't be talking to you," she said, "but I couldn't live with it either." She told me about the last 2 weeks of my father's life, how my mother insisted on being the only one to administer medication, how Peter installed cameras in the hallway, claiming it was for security, how my father stopped eating, stopped smiling, and one night, after a loud argument behind closed doors, he started whispering things Rachel couldn't quite understand. Something about a file, she said, a recording, and he begged me not to trust them. My stomach churned. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of notebook paper. "Your mother told me to throw away all his journals, but I kept one page. It didn't feel right." I unfolded it, a letter scrawled in shaky pen. "If anything happens to me, check the study floorboards. Tell Catherine the truth. I couldn't save myself, but maybe she can." I stared at it, not even realizing my hands were trembling until the paper fluttered. "I don't want money," I whispered. "I just want to know who my father was in the end. I want to undo what they've done to his name." Rachel looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you're braver than he was allowed to be." I never wanted to be the kind of woman who read through her dead father's emails or pulled backups from his discarded phone. But grief doesn't care about dignity, and neither does betrayal. His old Android was slow but functional. With help from a data recovery tool, I began pulling old messages, voicemails, files. Most were mundane, reminders, grocery lists, notes for a retirement plan he never got to enjoy. But buried deep in a folder labeled Drafts, I found a message that stopped my breath. It was unsent, addressed to no one, just a line of text. "Peter is not my blood. He doesn't deserve this. Catherine does." I reread it 5 times, then sat back in the chair, stunned. The floor beneath me didn't feel stable anymore, like the whole foundation of this family had shifted. I dove into his banking records next. I still had access to his online account from years ago, when he asked me to help pay the utility bills remotely. The password hadn't changed. What I found chilled me. 2 months before his death, there was a $50,000 transfer to a personal checking account I didn't recognize. But the name, Peter Monroe. Not a joint account. Not tied to any family investment. Just a private, hidden bank trail. I traced the routing number. Offshore routing flag. Why would Dad send money there? Or did he? Another entry caught my attention. $27,840 to Sierra Wellness Consulting, listed as a medical expense. But when I contacted the hospital where my father received care, they had no record of any third-party consulting firm. No external treatments, nothing. I cross-checked Sierra Wellness, no business license, no real online presence. Just a disconnected number and a dead-end address in Nevada. Something was wrong. Deeply, dangerously wrong. I needed air. So I drove, not far, just to the little cafe Dad used to love. The one on the corner with the red awning and 2 strong coffee. The same barista was there, a kind man in his 60s named Leo. His eyes softened when he saw me. "Haven't seen you in a while," he said, pouring a cup without asking. "Your dad used to sit right over there." I glanced at the worn leather chair in the corner. "He cried once," Leo said gently. Not loud, just quiet. Said he was worried he'd made a mistake he couldn't undo. Said he missed his daughter, but wasn't sure she'd ever forgive him. I stared into the cup, unable to swallow. Leo patted my hand. He ordered decaf that day, said he needed to sleep, but he couldn't. Said the house felt too loud with all the silence. Back at the house, I opened my laptop and began building a file. Everything I knew, everything I suspected, names, numbers, evidence, patterns, dates. If I disappeared, someone needed to understand the story. Even if it never made the news, I wasn't going to war, not yet. I was preparing. The next morning, I called a name I hadn't said out loud in 5 years. "Wendell Garvey," I said when he picked up. "You probably don't remember me." "I do," came the reply. "You're Gerald's girl." Wendell had been a top estate lawyer until, rumor had it, Peter tried to hire him during the first version of the will. Wendell refused. No one knew why, but he vanished from the family's orbit after that. When I told him what I'd found, he didn't hesitate. "I knew something was off," he said. "Peter wanted to change things fast. Your father wasn't even sick yet. I wouldn't touch it." We arranged a meeting. He would help me verify the legitimacy of both wills, compare handwriting samples, and advise next steps. Then I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to since college, Jesse Tran, now a fraud investigator. We met in a parking lot behind a hardware store like we were in some bad crime drama. "I need help tracing financial deception," I said bluntly. He didn't ask why, just nodded. "Let's draw the map." That night, I started sleeping in the guest room. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted every angle of the house covered. I placed my phone on record whenever Peter came over. I backed up every document twice, one in the cloud, one on an external drive hidden in the woodshed. At 3:02 a.m., I received the email. No sender, no subject, just one line in the body. "If you dig too far, someone will bury you with his secrets." I stared at the screen, and I smiled. Because threats, when you're prepared, feel more like confirmation. The memorial was set for exactly 1 year after my father's death. Same hour, same backyard, same guest list. But this time I controlled the narrative. Invitations were sent with elegant restraint. The flowers were his favorites, white orchids. The catering was subtle. Every detail whispered reverence. But beneath it all, I had built a stage. My mother arrived first, dressed in black pearls and a somber expression she had perfected over decades. Peter followed, chatting with distant cousins like nothing had ever fractured. The rest of the family scattered throughout the yard, exchanging condolences and baked goods. When I took the microphone, the sun was just starting to slip behind the oak trees. I cleared my throat and looked out over the people who had all, in some way or another, participated in the charade of unity. "I've spent the last year trying to understand who my father really was," I began. "Not the version you saw at dinner parties or on holiday cards, but the man behind the silences. The man whose voice I hadn't heard in months before he died." I paused. Someone shifted uncomfortably in the back. I thought I was coming home to mourn, but instead I came home to discover what had been erased. Murmurs. My mother's jaw clenched. "I'd like to share something with you," I said, turning toward the small projector I had placed discreetly beside the patio table. The screen blinked on, and there he was, my father, pale, thin, eyes full of something between fear and resolve. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means they never let me file the truth." "Catherine, I'm sorry. I tried." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My mother stood frozen. Peter's face went white. The video ended, not with drama, but with silence. My father staring into the lens, as if asking someone, anyone, to remember him correctly. My mother left halfway through the guest's stunned silence, heels clicking like a gavel. Peter stayed, but he didn't speak. He couldn't. The next morning, I filed a motion with the probate court, attaching both wills, video testimony, banking irregularities, and documentation from Wendell and Jesse. I sent an identical package to 3 local reporters. By noon, I was trending, but it wasn't over. A week later, Jesse handed me a manila folder. Inside was the result of a secret DNA test he had arranged using hair from an old comb of Peter's and a preserved toothbrush of Dad's. It wasn't a match. Peter Monroe was not biologically related to Gerald Monroe. The silence I felt reading that was different from the others. It wasn't grief, it was understanding. A missing puzzle piece I never knew had been missing until it snapped into place. I didn't cry. I forwarded the results to the court. The press caught wind almost instantly. Headlines exploded. Inheritance deception uncovered. Daughter exposes family fraud. Bloodline lies. I became the unwilling protagonist in a scandalous narrative. My inbox flooded. Some messages were supportive, others were vicious. But the truth was louder than all of them. Extended family began to call, shocked, angry, asking why we were never told. My answer was always the same. I only just found out, and I wish I hadn't. Peter went silent. My mother vanished, literally. She didn't answer calls, didn't return to her house. But she left something behind, paperwork discovered during a second audit, an insurance claim, filed under a pseudonym, claiming a payout for Gerald Monroe's death. A policy that no one, not even the estate lawyer, knew existed. The beneficiary was listed as a name only one person in our family had ever used. Her childhood nickname. It was filed 2 weeks before my father's death. The payout, $1.2 million. And the listed witness on the claim? A now disbarred nurse from Sierra Wellness. I gathered everything, sent it to Wendell, who brought in a criminal attorney. We filed formal charges for fraud, financial deception, and, in an unprecedented move, negligent homicide by means of coerced medication abuse. I wasn't seeking vengeance, I was seeking history. Because if no one else would tell the truth about my father's death, then I would. Even if it meant bearing the last pieces of a family I once believed in. The trial didn't look like justice, not at first. It looked like paperwork, testimonies, cross-examinations, delivered in sanitized courtrooms where the air smelled like disinfectant and old ink. But behind the motions and motions to dismiss, something was shifting. Peter sat stiffly in his tailored suit, his hands clenching and unclenching beneath the table. I watched him through the blur of it all, wondering if he was trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong, or if he even believed it had. The charges against him were clear: financial fraud, document tampering, obstruction of probate processes. The judge was unimpressed by his charm. The jury didn't laugh at his jokes. When the court revoked his access to all assets tied to my father's estate, I didn't cheer, I just exhaled. They said Peter's lawyers would appeal. They always say that. But no appeal could rewrite DNA. No argument could undo the money trail. And no lawyer could argue with a dead man's voice, whispering the truth on video. As for my mother, the silence from her end grew louder each day. Her house was abandoned, her accounts drained. A warrant was issued after she failed to appear in response to insurance fraud charges. Local news picked up the headline, "Mother-daughter scandal exposes hidden fortune, lies, and a man's last plea." They called it poetic. They called it a takedown. I called it grief with structure. I never set out to punish them. I wanted clarity. But as the gavel came down and the estate was officially split, half to Peter, then promptly seized by the court, I was asked what I wanted to do with my share. I told them I wanted to donate it, all of it, to a foundation under my father's name, the Gerald Monroe Trust, for elderly care reform and caregiver protection programs. Because the truth is, nothing I could buy would ever equal the weight of that year. Nothing could balance the cost of what had been taken, not just from me, but from my father, from the man who tried, in his final days, to correct something that had broken long ago. People thought I was being noble. I wasn't. I was preserving something, a version of him that deserved to be remembered. 2 weeks after the verdict, I drove to the cemetery just before sunset. The sky was smeared in lavender and ash. His gravestone sat quietly beneath a red maple, its edges softened by moss. I sat on the grass and pulled a folded paper from my coat. A poem, one he had written decades ago, back when I was too young to understand that parents were people, too. Time does not silence the truth, it waits, gathers dust, until one voice says, enough. I read it aloud, not because I thought he could hear me, but because I needed to hear it in my own voice. There was no one else at the cemetery, just me, and the memory of what almost got erased. Later that week, I finished the last chapter of my book. I called it What the House Hid. It wasn't a memoir in the traditional sense. It was a map, a path for anyone who had ever felt like their family story didn't match the script they'd been handed. I wrote it for the daughters who were forgotten, the sons who were silenced, the caretakers who saw too much and said too little. The book hit #1 within days of release. Then the letters came, hundreds. Some were emails, some handwritten in looping cursive or typed with trembling fingers. All of them carried the same message beneath the words, I thought I was alone. They came from people like me, women who had been cut out of wills, discredited by siblings, made to feel invisible in the homes they helped build. They came from nurses, therapists, even former estate attorneys who had seen too much. I read every single one. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed, sometimes I just sat still for a long time, holding their pain like it was sacred. One envelope was different, no return address, no name, just my name on the front. Inside, a single folded page, cream-colored stationery I hadn't seen in years. 3 words, I always knew. There was no signature, no date, but I knew her handwriting. I knew the way she looped the Y, the slight slant that always reminded me of trying too hard. My mother, I didn't open the letter further. I didn't need to. She always knew. She knew what Peter wasn't. She knew what Dad had planned. She knew what she had done. And knowing that she had known somehow hurt more than if she hadn't. I didn't destroy the letter. I didn't frame it. I tucked it inside my father's old journal, the one with the missing pages, between 2 entries about the first time I walked and the first time I lied. Some truths don't need responses. Some letters don't need replies. And some people, even when they disappear, leave echoes that never quite fade. The road to Oregon curved through forests so dense, the sky disappeared. I didn't mind. After a year of scrutiny and whispers, the quiet felt earned. I settled in a cabin nestled between cedar trees and silence, miles from the nearest town. The air smelled of pine and new beginnings. Inside, the space was small but purposeful. A wooden desk by the window, bookshelves filled with second-hand titles. A wood-burning stove that complained every morning before it warmed the space. It wasn't luxury, it was mine. I didn't bring much with me. Just a few clothes, my father's journal, and a hard drive of documents I no longer had to fight with. No portraits, no trophies. Just one photo I kept inside a drawer. Dad hugging me on my 10th birthday. Both of us blurry with laughter. I wasn't ready to frame it, but I wasn't ready to let it go either. I started the memoir writing group without fanfare. I put up a small notice in the library and another at the local cafe for women with stories too heavy to carry alone. The first meeting had 3 people, the second 8. By the 4th, we needed to rent a bigger room. They came with journals filled with secrets. Some had been disowned for who they loved. Others had raised siblings like mothers and been left with nothing. One woman simply said, "I was the one who stayed, and they made me regret it." I didn't offer therapy, just space, paper, encouragement. We wrote, we cried, we laughed at things that probably shouldn't be funny. And slowly, we turned pain into narrative. I never told them everything about my story, but they knew enough. I had boundaries now, real ones, not the polite, shaky walls I used to build out of guilt and habit. These were hard lines, no contact with Peter, no letters answered, no inbox open for apologies that only wanted to erase what had happened. I wasn't angry, I was done. And in that stillness, peace grew roots. I often walked the nearby trail at dawn, when the mist still clung to the leaves. I'd carry a notebook, but rarely wrote. Mostly, I just breathed. There was power in knowing I could stop searching. That I no longer had to decode silence or interpret glances across the dinner table. One morning, I met someone on that trail. His name was Michael. We'd gone to high school together, but hadn't spoken since graduation. He'd returned to Oregon after a divorce, bought a plot of land, and spent his days restoring antique furniture and growing tomatoes. Our conversations started the way all good ones do, with no agenda. We talked about books, music, how badly both of us cooked. There were no questions about what happened or, "Are you okay now?" Just the quiet companionship of 2 people who had nothing to prove to each other. It took me months to realize I was in love, and even longer to believe it could be real, because it was gentle, not dramatic. It didn't come in to rescue me. It came in when I no longer needed rescuing. We planted a garden behind the cabin, tomatoes, herbs, some wildflowers that refused to behave. I let them grow as they wanted, like I was learning to do. One afternoon, I cleaned the spare room and turned it into a writing space. I framed the birthday photo and placed it on the new desk. Beneath it, I slid the first pages of my next manuscript. The working title, "Dear Dad," I made it out. The book wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about the truth. It was about survival, about choosing to be more than the sum of what was taken from me, about telling the story from the other side of silence. I wrote in the mornings, taught in the afternoons, and let myself rest in the evenings without guilt. I read poems out loud to no one. I watched the sky shift seasons. I let time pass, and in that passing I realized something. My father hadn't left me money. He hadn't left me a letter, or a plan, or even an apology that could fix everything. What he left me was courage, the first whisper, the push to question the story I'd been told, and the strength to write my own. He left me his flaws too, his silences, his regrets, but he also left me a mirror, one that didn't distort. I looked at that mirror now and saw a woman who wasn't trying to be remembered by the family who forgot her. I saw a woman building her own legacy, brick by honest brick. One evening, as the light slipped golden across the trees, I stood at the edge of the garden and whispered. I made it out. The wind answered by rustling the wildflowers. Later, I wrote the last line of my new book. He didn't leave me an inheritance. He left me resilience. And now I leave that behind for someone else.